Welcome to my channel. I hope today's story will be something you truly enjoy. Please support me even more. Now, let's begin the story.
My name is Juliet Sinclair, and I was 35 years old when I realized the cruelest jokes are usually told by the people who know exactly where to aim. It was New Year's Eve, and I was sitting at my parents' dining table, already counting the minutes until I could leave, when my brother decided to turn me into the evening's entertainment. He leaned back in his chair, lifted his glass with that smug little smile he had worn since we were kids, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "35 and still not married? Must be rough spending New Year's alone, huh? Old maid?" The room broke into laughter so easily it was obvious this was not the first time my life had been treated like a family punchline. My mother gave a weak smile. My father said nothing. My brother's wife looked down at her plate. And for a second, I almost did what I had done for years: smile politely, let it slide, and pretend none of it got under my skin. But something in me was finished that night. I set my glass down, looked straight at him, and said, "Don't worry about my life. I've been married for 5 years." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. My brother laughed first, but this time it sounded thin, nervous. He thought I was bluffing. So I reached for my phone and opened the part of my life none of them had ever been allowed to see. And the look on his face in that moment was only the beginning, because if my family had known what I had been hiding all those years, they would have understood why my silence was never weakness. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand how my brother became the one person in that house everyone protected no matter what he did. If you had met my family back then, you probably would have understood the pattern within 10 minutes. My brother had always been the center of gravity in that house. He was the son, the easy one, the loud one, the one who knew how to fill a room and make people laugh even when he had done nothing particularly impressive. Growing up, he was the person my parents described with words like strong, dependable, and natural leader, even when all he had really done was play sports, charm adults, and learn how to talk his way out of trouble. I was the opposite. I was quieter, more serious, more focused. And because I caused so few problems, everyone seemed to assume I needed less attention. If I brought home perfect grades, my parents would smile and say they were proud of me. Then somehow the conversation would drift back to my brother before dinner was over. If he managed something ordinary, it was celebrated like a major family event. If I achieved something difficult, it was treated as nice but expected, as if effort only counted when it came wrapped in a personality big enough to entertain the room. By the time we were adults, those roles had only hardened. My brother married young, bought a house in the suburbs, had children on a timeline my parents approved of, and quickly became the living symbol of what they considered a successful life. Every holiday came with new photos of the girls, stories about school pickups, barbecue weekends, mortgage payments, and home improvement projects. My parents loved that kind of life because they understood it. It was visible. It was familiar. It was easy to point to and say, "This is what stability looks like." My life looked nothing like that. I went to law school, buried myself in work, and built a career in a world my family could not explain at church dinners or neighborhood cookouts. I handled complex deals, worked punishing hours, and learned how to survive in rooms where nobody cared whether I was likable as long as I was right. I was proud of that life. I had earned every inch of it. But in my parents' house, all of it somehow felt invisible next to a minivan in the driveway and a Christmas card photo with matching sweaters. It was not that they openly hated what I had built. It was something quieter and, in some ways, worse. They simply treated it like it belonged to another language. My brother benefited from that without ever questioning it. In fact, I think he came to depend on it. As long as the family measured success by the life he had chosen, he never had to look too closely at what I was becoming. And that was exactly why he got so comfortable turning me into a joke. He had spent years believing I was the one who had failed to build a real life, because no one in that house had ever bothered to teach him otherwise. What he did not realize was that while everyone was applauding the life they could understand, I had already started building one they would never see coming. The older I got, the more obvious it became that my family did not know what to do with a version of success that did not look like theirs. By the time I was in my 30s, I had built a career I was proud of, one that demanded long hours, relentless focus, and a tolerance for pressure most people would never willingly sign up for. I worked in corporate law with a focus on high-stakes tech deals, the kind where one weak clause or one missed detail could cost a client millions of dollars. My days were packed with negotiations, filings, conference calls, travel, and deadlines that had no interest in whether I had slept the night before. It was exhausting, but it was also the first thing in my life that felt fully mine. I had earned my place in that world the hard way, and every promotion, every major account, every hard-won victory meant something to me because I knew exactly what it had cost. The problem was that none of that translated at home. Whenever I tried to share something important, it landed with a dull thud and disappeared almost immediately. I still remember one dinner when I had just helped close a major acquisition for a technology client, one of the biggest deals I had worked on up to that point. I was excited, not because of the money or prestige, but because I had handled pressure that once would have terrified me and come out stronger on the other side. My mother listened for less than a minute before turning to ask my brother about a beach trip he was planning with his family. My father nodded absently, then started talking about whether my brother was finally going to redo the back patio before summer. It was like watching my own life get erased in real time. Another time, when I mentioned I had been asked to speak on a legal panel in Boston, my mother smiled and said that was nice, but then added that people understood weddings, babies, and buying homes more than all that complicated legal stuff. She said it casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, but I never forgot it. What she really meant was that my life did not feel real to them because it did not fit their idea of a woman's life well lived. In my family, if a woman had a husband, children, and holiday traditions people could photograph, then her life made sense. If she had a demanding career, a passport full of flights, and a mind built for strategy instead of small talk, people did not quite know where to place her. My brother noticed that gap long before I did, and once he did, he used it every chance he got. He would make little comments in front of everyone about how I was too intimidating for men, too busy for a relationship, too independent for anyone to put up with. Sometimes he said it with a grin, sometimes in that fake, concerned tone that made it sound like he was just joking, but there was always something mean underneath it. What made it worse was that no one ever really stopped him. Maybe my parents thought it was harmless. Maybe they agreed with him more than they wanted to admit. Either way, the message was always the same. My accomplishments were impressive in theory, but they did not count in the emotional math of the family because they could not be displayed the same way his life could. So eventually, I stopped trying. I stopped calling to share good news. I stopped explaining what I was working on. I stopped hoping that one day they would suddenly understand the value of what I had built. I still showed up for holidays when I had to, still sat through dinners and polite conversations and the occasional insult wrapped as humor, but I gave them less and less of my real life. They took my silence as proof that nothing much was happening. They assumed I had become exactly what my brother joked that I was, a lonely woman married to her work, going home to an empty apartment after every professional success. The truth was, by then, I had already learned the safest thing you can do around people who constantly reduce your life is to stop handing them pieces of it. And not long after I made that choice, I met the one person who changed everything without even realizing it at first. I met Graham Foster in a glass conference room on a Thursday afternoon that was supposed to be forgettable. My firm was handling a complicated deal involving a fast-growing cybersecurity company, and Graham was the man on the other side of the table. He was not what I expected. Most executives in his position either tried too hard to dominate the room or pretended to be more relaxed than they really were. Graham did neither. He was calm, sharp, and paying close attention from the moment I started walking through the risks in the contract. When he disagreed with me, he did it directly. When I pushed back, he listened instead of getting defensive. By the end of that first meeting, I remember thinking that he was one of the few men I had ever worked with who did not seem threatened by a woman who knew exactly what she was talking about. What started as professional respect turned into longer conversations after meetings, then dinners that somehow lasted hours, then the kind of quiet attachment that sneaks up on you before you are ready to name it. Graham asked questions nobody in my family had ever asked me. He wanted to know why I had gone into law, what kind of cases mattered to me, what winning actually felt like after years of working that hard. He listened in a way that made me realize how starved I had been for that kind of attention. Around him, I did not have to shrink or soften the parts of myself that other people found too intense. He liked that I was intense. He admired it. For the first time in a long time, I felt understood, without having to explain every inch of myself. We were careful at first because of the professional overlap, but once the deal closed and the legal boundaries were gone, everything between us moved with a kind of steady certainty that felt almost unfamiliar to me. There were no games, no mixed signals, no moments where I had to wonder whether he found my ambition inconvenient. He made room for it. He made room for me. And because I was still stupid enough to hope that maybe this time things could be different, I eventually brought him home for Thanksgiving. Part of me knew it was a mistake before we even walked through the front door. My mother became overly bright in that strained way she always did when she was performing politeness instead of feeling it. My father kept sizing Graham up with the kind of quiet suspicion he usually reserved for men he thought were too polished. My brother was the worst of all. He started with harmless-sounding questions about business, then drifted into that mocking tone he used when he wanted to make someone uncomfortable without looking openly rude. He joked about city people, about startup money, about men who were more committed to work than family. He kept glancing at me every time he spoke, like the whole performance was really meant for my benefit. Graham stayed calm through all of it, but I could feel the shift in me with every passing minute. It was the same old family script, just with a new target at the table. The man I loved was being measured, mocked, and quietly challenged by people who had done nothing to earn the right to judge either one of us. We left as soon as we reasonably could. I remember the silence in the car afterward, the kind that is not cold but heavy with truth. Then Graham reached over, took my hand, and said something that settled into me so deeply I never forgot it. He said, "You do not have to keep offering your happiness to people who only know how to insult it." I stared out the window for a long time after that because I knew he was right, and I hated how long it had taken me to accept it. I had spent years believing that if I was patient enough, successful enough, kind enough, my family would eventually learn how to love me without diminishing me first. But after that Thanksgiving, something in me changed. I stopped asking what I could do to make them understand me, and I started asking what I needed to protect before they found a way to poison that too. 6 months after that Thanksgiving, Graham asked me to marry him, and there was something almost healing about how simple the moment felt. There was no performance in it, no grand audience, no pressure to turn it into a story for other people to approve of. It was just the two of us, standing in the quiet center of a life we had built together. And for the first time in years, I did not feel like I had to brace myself against anything. I said yes, without hesitation. What came after that should have been the easy part. But for me, it was not. The moment we started talking about a wedding, I could already feel my family's presence pressing in on it like a stain. I could hear the comments before they were ever spoken. My mother making everything about appearances. My father acting as though he were evaluating a business arrangement. My brother finding some way to turn the day into a joke or a competition. I had seen that pattern too many times to pretend it would be different just because this was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life. Graham understood that long before I had to explain it in full. He never pushed me to include people who had not earned access to something so personal. He never tried to sell me some fantasy about family harmony that did not exist. He just asked what kind of wedding would actually make me feel peaceful, and once I let myself answer honestly, the choice became obvious. We got married in Napa Valley with only a handful of people there. His parents came, his younger sister came, and a few close friends who had seen our relationship grow from the beginning. That was it. No forced smiles, no awkward speeches, no one making passive-aggressive jokes over champagne. No one treating the entire event like a stage for their opinions. It was warm, quiet, beautiful, and real in a way I had honestly never believed a wedding could be. I wore a simple dress. Graham looked at me like there was nowhere else on earth he would rather be. The vineyard rolled out behind us in the late afternoon light, and when we said our vows, I remember feeling something loosen inside me that had been tight for most of my adult life. I was not just marrying someone I loved. I was stepping into a version of my life that did not require me to defend my own worth every time I walked into a room. What I remember most, though, was not the ceremony. It was the way Graham's family welcomed me afterward. They did not treat me like an accessory to his success or a woman who had finally checked the right box at the right age. They asked me about my work because they were genuinely interested. They spoke about me with warmth and respect, not polite tolerance. During dinner, Graham's father raised his glass and said they were not welcoming me because of who I had married, but because of who I was. I smiled through it, but inside I felt something break open. I had spent so many years in a family where love always seemed to come with comparison, where approval was measured against someone else's choices, where I was constantly made to feel a little too much in the wrong ways and not enough in the right ones. Sitting there with people who expected nothing from me except honesty and presence, I realized how abnormal my own family had made love feel. After the wedding, Graham and I made a decision that would sound strange to anyone raised in a healthy family. We agreed not to tell mine. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was not a dramatic vow, and it was not born from spite. It was self-protection. Plain and simple. We both knew what would happen if I invited the Sinclairs into that part of my life too soon. They would question it, pick at it, reduce it, compare it, and somehow make me feel guilty for choosing happiness on my own terms. I was not willing to do that to my marriage. I was not willing to take something so steady and good and place it in the hands of people who had spent years proving they could not touch anything precious without trying to control it first. So I kept my name at work. I kept my personal life quiet. To my family, I remained exactly what they had always assumed I was: single, career-obsessed, and alone. They never asked enough questions to discover otherwise. And as the months turned into years, I realized something that surprised even me. Keeping that secret did not make me feel dishonest. It made me feel safe. It gave my marriage room to grow in peace, far away from the constant noise of people who would have treated it like one more opportunity to judge me. For 5 years, Graham and I built a beautiful life behind that silence, and I protected it with a fierceness I had never once been allowed to show as a daughter. What I did not know then was that the same secret that kept my happiness safe would one day become the reason my brother finally lost everything he had spent his life assuming would always be his. For 5 years, my marriage existed in a world completely separate from my family, And the strangest part was how natural that separation eventually became. In Boston, my life was full, in a way I had once thought only happened to other people. Graham and I built a quiet, steady routine that never needed an audience to feel real. We worked hard, came home to each other, and filled our days with the kind of small, solid rituals that make a marriage strong. We ate late dinners in the kitchen after long work days. We took weekend trips when our schedules allowed it. We hosted close friends, argued about paint colors, laughed over takeout containers on the counter, and learned each other so well that even silence between us felt peaceful. His company kept growing. My career kept climbing. I had a home, a husband, a life I loved, and none of it depended on anyone else's approval. Then I would go back to North Carolina for a holiday, walk into my parents' house alone, and feel myself step straight back into the role they had all assigned me years earlier. In that house, I was still the overworked daughter, the serious sister, the woman who had somehow let life pass her by. They looked at me with that same mix of pity and judgment people reserve for someone they assume missed her chance. My family never questioned that version of me because it was convenient. It made my brother look successful by comparison. It made my parents feel validated in the life they understood best. And because I had stopped correcting them, they settled more deeply into their assumptions every year. Cole, especially, grew more comfortable with it. There was something almost pathetic about how badly he seemed to need me to stay exactly where he had placed me in his mind. Every joke he made at my expense carried the same message underneath it. I was the cautionary tale. I was the woman who had chosen work over love, ambition over family, independence over happiness. He said it with a grin, usually in front of everyone, and because he wrapped it in humor, people let it pass. But by then, I understood something I had not fully seen when I was younger. Cole did not make those jokes because he truly believed I was less than him. He made them because he needed the family to keep believing it. On the surface, his life still looked like the one my parents admired most. He had a wife, 2 daughters, a house in the suburbs, and the image of a man who had followed the expected path. But the closer I looked, the more cracks I saw. He had become restless, impatient, and weirdly defensive about things that used to come easily to him. He bounced from one business idea to the next, always talking about the opportunity that was about to change everything. There was always a new partnership, a new contact, a new plan that was supposedly just one step away from becoming huge. He talked about these things with the confidence of a man trying very hard to convince himself first and everyone else second. Sometimes he bragged too much. Sometimes he got irritated too fast when people asked ordinary questions. Sometimes he drank more than he used to and became sharper around the edges, especially when attention shifted away from him. More than once, he came to me for help without ever calling it help. He would ask a quick question about a contract. He would mention a deal and casually want my opinion on the language. He would bring up some business issue and pretend he was only curious, when it was obvious he needed real guidance. A few times there were even hints about money, framed as short-term problems or temporary pressure. I helped when I thought it would avoid unnecessary conflict, and every time I did, he reacted the same way. In private, he wanted my competence. In public, he still needed me diminished. That was when I finally understood him in full. Cole had built too much of his identity around being the successful one in the family, the understandable one, the visible one. As long as everyone kept seeing me as the unmarried sister with nothing but work, he never had to confront the possibility that I had built something deeper and stronger than the life he kept performing for them. Brooke had started noticing it too, though she never said much. She was not cruel to me, not in the way Cole was, but she had spent years doing what everyone else in that family did. She stayed quiet because peace was easier than honesty. Still, There were moments when Cole would make one of his usual comments, and I would catch Brooke looking at him with something that did not quite look like amusement anymore. It looked like fatigue, maybe even embarrassment. My parents, of course, remained loyal to the version of reality that required the least self-examination. They still spoke about Cole's life as if it were the clear model of adulthood, and spoke about mine as if it were some strange puzzle no one could solve. They never asked why I always arrived alone. They never asked who I spent holidays with when I was not there. They never wondered whether silence might mean privacy instead of emptiness. They simply accepted the easiest explanation because it fit the family story they had been telling themselves for years. I let them. By then, silence no longer felt like defeat. It felt like control. Every holiday I survived without explaining myself felt less like sadness and more like strategy. I was not waiting for them to suddenly see my worth anymore. I was simply refusing to hand them anything else they could reduce, question, or turn into one more way to make Cole feel bigger. Then came that New Year's Eve. Even before dinner started, I could feel something off in the room. Cole had been in a sour mood all week because a business opportunity he had been bragging about suddenly looked unstable. My mother was trying too hard to sound cheerful. My father kept making stiff, practical conversation, the kind he used when he could feel tension but did not want to name it. Brooke looked tired. I arrived alone, exactly the way I always did, and the second Cole saw me walk through the door without a man beside me, I could almost feel him relax into what he thought was familiar territory. To him, I was still the easiest target in the room, still the sister whose life could be reduced to a joke before dessert. Still the woman he could make smaller in order to make himself feel steady again. What he did not see was everything waiting for me back in Boston. He did not see my husband. He did not see the home Graham and I had built. He did not see the years of peace, love, success, and stability that existed beyond his imagination. He only saw me walking into that dining room alone, and because he had spent so many years mistaking privacy for failure, he thought he knew exactly who I was. That was his final mistake. By the time he lifted his glass and decided to make me the joke of the night, he believed he was stepping into a script he had controlled for years. He had no idea that the life he had mocked for so long was never the real one. And he had no idea that this time, for the first time in years, I had absolutely nothing left to protect by staying quiet. The second I said I had been married for 5 years, the room went dead still. It was the kind of silence that did not feel natural, the kind that makes every tiny sound suddenly seem too loud. My mother froze with her glass in her hand. My father stared at me like I had said something impossible, something that did not belong in the version of me they had all agreed to believe in for years. Brooke slowly looked up from her plate, and Cole's smug expression began to crack. He laughed first, but it sounded thin, unsteady, almost fragile. "Come on, Juliet. You expect us to believe that?" I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I unlocked my phone, opened the album I had kept hidden for 5 years, and set it on the table where everyone could see it. Wedding photos in Napa Valley. Graham's hand wrapped around mine. Our first Christmas in Boston. A gala in New York. A summer trip to Maine. A full, beautiful life none of them had ever known about. Not because it was fake, not because it was secret out of shame, but because I had learned a long time ago that not every good thing in my life was safe in that house. My mother looked shaken. My father looked embarrassed. Brooke stared at the screen, then at Cole. He was still the only one trying to recover control, still trying to claw his way back into the role he always played at that table. "So what? You kept a whole marriage secret just to pull this stunt tonight?" he asked. I looked at him and said, "No. I kept it secret because I knew exactly what this family would do to anything good in my life if I handed it to you too soon." No one interrupted me. For once, I got to finish. For once, nobody cut in, redirected the conversation, or acted like what I was saying was too much. I told them I met Graham through work, that we built a life in Boston, and that I stopped sharing my good news years ago because every conversation always found its way back to Cole. His house, his kids, his plans, his ego, his needs. The things he wanted always seemed to matter more than the life I was actually living. My father asked why I never told them after the wedding. I told him the truth. Because every time I tried to tell this family who I was, someone made sure the story became about Cole again. That silence was worse than a fight. My mother started crying. Brooke sat very still, like she was replaying years of jokes and little humiliations she had once dismissed, because it was easier to call them harmless than to admit what they really were. Cole reacted exactly the way he always did when the truth cornered him. He called me dramatic. He said it was just a joke. He said I wanted to embarrass him. He tried to make himself the victim of the moment. Like my honesty was somehow more offensive than his cruelty. But this time, no one rushed to save him. Brooke looked at him and quietly asked, "Was it?" Then my father said something I had almost never heard him say to my brother. "Enough, Cole." That was the moment the room finally turned. It was subtle, but I felt it. For the first time in my life, the weight of the room did not land on me. I left soon after, calm and clear-headed. I had said what I needed to say, and for the first time in years, I walked out of that house feeling lighter instead of smaller. When I got back to Boston, Graham took one look at me and said, "You told them." I nodded, and when he pulled me into his arms, I knew I had already won. Not because I had hurt anyone, not because I had planned some perfect revenge, but because I had finally told the truth without apologizing for it. But Cole was not the kind of man who could sit quietly with humiliation. Over the next week, everything started falling apart. He had been bragging for months about a business deal that was supposed to change his life, the kind of deal he talked about at family dinners like it was proof he was finally on the edge of something bigger. But after New Year's, he started unraveling. He drank too much, snapped at people, and made bitter comments to the wrong client. He mocked me, mocked women, and showed exactly who he was under pressure, without the family there to laugh and smooth it over for him. The deal died. Then another opportunity disappeared too. At home, Brooke finally stopped excusing him. She told him she did not want their daughters growing up around a man who needed to humiliate women to feel important. She told him she was tired of watching him turn cruelty into entertainment and ego into leadership. She took the girls and left. Not long after, she filed for divorce. Cole, desperate now, turned to my parents for money and support. For the first time in his life, they said no. My father refused him. My mother cried, but she refused him too. Suddenly, Cole had lost everything he thought would always protect him. His wife was gone. His daughters were gone from the house. His deal was dead. His reputation was damaged. Even friends started backing away once the cracks became too obvious to ignore. My parents, meanwhile, were finally forced to face what they had done. They admitted they had ignored me because my life was harder for them to understand, and they had let Cole shape the whole family for years because confronting him was inconvenient, uncomfortable, and easier to avoid. They admitted they had treated my silence like emptiness instead of privacy. I did not forgive them overnight, but I let them begin. Months later, I brought Graham to meet them, not to prove anything, not to gloat, but because I was done hiding my life to make other people comfortable. By then, Brooke had no intention of going back. Cole was living in a rental, seeing his daughters on a legal schedule, and blaming everyone but himself. He liked to say I ruined his life by telling the truth. But the truth was much simpler than that. Cole did not lose everything because I exposed him in one night. He lost everything because he had spent years building his whole identity around making someone else feel small. He had built his confidence on comparison, his power on humiliation, and his place in the family on being the person everyone protected instead of confronted. In the end, he lost his marriage, his children's daily presence, his business image, and the blind protection of our parents. He even lost the audience that used to laugh on cue. As for me, I did not win by destroying him. I won by refusing to stay small so he could keep feeling big. That was the real lesson. Never let anyone measure your worth by the milestones they use to feel superior. The people who truly love you will never need you to become less so they can feel like more. They will not mock what they do not understand just to protect their own ego. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not hurting the person who hurt you. It is protecting your peace until the truth finally walks into the room and leaves them alone with the damage they created themselves. At Revenge Argon, our team works hard to create meaningful, well-crafted stories that entertain, while also leaving viewers with thoughtful lessons. We want to be clear that this is a fictional story, created to share educational messages, emotional insight, and valuable life perspectives with our audience. Cole is the kind of antagonist who hides cruelty behind jokes, and that often makes him even more dangerous because people excuse the damage until it is too late. His downfall shows that arrogance, jealousy, and disrespect can destroy a person from the inside out. If you were in Juliet's place, how would you deal with someone like Cole, and would you stay silent as long as she did?